that on.
Thank you. It's pretty exciting for me to be here today. I am so impressed that we're having this conversation. When I first heard that Oak and Senator Osmond were talking about writing a bill to get rid of compulsory education, I think I sent him an email and said, "You are the craziest person I've ever met. I cannot believe that you would be willing to take on that task." In my opinion, I think this isn't said, is it?
Sorry. No, it's going. It's
Okay. In my opinion, as I write in my new Commonwealth school book, compulsory education is probably was the beginning of the end. We were doing fairly well in the United States without compulsory education. We had problems. It wasn't as if we didn't have problems, but there were specific agendas that were trying to be met. And when we had our first ABE conference, Steve Adams was the one who brought this to our attention about compulsory education. It is so much part of our lifestyle now. I think that to get rid of any kind of government control over education is going to be a huge task. And I am not really sure. I mean, I know that Senator Osmond is trying to choose something, some kind of in-between that will help us step away from it. But it will never please people like myself who really just want to be free. I just want to be free. I think my children want to be free. I think the founders wanted me to be free. I think they wanted you to be free. And they wanted you to be free to fail. They wanted me to be free to fail because they understood the principle of freedom was the freedom to fail. But if we allowed people to fail, we also allowed them for immense success. And if you haven't noticed lately that the United States is still the leader in all the great inventions that are throughout the world, because we believe in freedom, because we have a culture of freedom. And I'm not really sure why our education system isn't following that example. So as I was saying, when we had our very first ABE conference, I was in the middle of getting my master's degree. I was very overwhelmed, but I was pretty excited about what was going on with this whole thing. And I was invited the last minute to come to the meeting, and I was so grateful I went because one of my great admirers, Neil Flinders, was there speaking, and I'd never been able to hear him speak before, and I realized that this whole movement kind of was sparked because of his book, Teach the Children, which is one of my all-time favorite classics. And Steve Adams spoke at that. I was very moved by Steve's words. And he gave a really insightful presentation on the history of compulsory education. I think that is still on your website, is it not? Okay. The slides, at least, aren't on your website? I have a copy of them. I'd be so happy to I look at them all the time and I refer to them all the time. Anyway, he said, he gave an interesting solution to the current compulsory education problems. And he encouraged creating what he called groups of voluntary association. He called them covenant communities. So he said these communities had to have individuals who could choose in to be there and individuals who could choose to leave at any time. And he called groups of voluntary association can collectively express individual choice while respecting liberty and agency. And my really good friend, Diane Jepson, was sitting right next to me during this presentation. She leaned over and she said, "He's talking about Commonwealth schools." And I said, yeah, I know, right? And I think it was at that point that I kind of got an idea of the impact and the importance of my work and what I had been doing for the last 10 years. And it was the theme of my thesis for my master's program. So let me tell you what I understand about covenant communities and what I have learned through my own experience through covenant communities and my own research and education. My husband and I we wrote a book called The Lost DaVincis, as Oak said, and it's a read aloud for children, for parents to read to their children, especially specifically for that homeschool group of kids who don't have any other heroes in any other books, because everyone always is going to some kind of private school or boarding school or public school. And so they don't really have anyone who gets them. So we decided, because I've been homeschooling for 29 years, and I don't expect all of you to do the same that I've done. It was a choice that I made because I just wanted to be free. And we homeschoolers are just freedom mongers. We just have to be free. And so we wrote this book, and it's about 4 children, Sophia, IT, Frankie, and Eddie, whose parents and youngest brother go missing. And IT, that's short for Isaac Thomas, he's confident that it has something to do with his father's latest invention, and that they've disappeared somehow into this invention. And they don't feel like they have a lot of choices to go out into the community and ask for help, because they're afraid that if they go to the authorities, they'll just be taken into custody, and then that way they won't be able to help solve the problem, because IT is the only one that knows about really his father's newest invention. And they do have relatives. They have a grandmother and grandfather who are in China on a service mission, and they have a crazy scientist uncle and an actress aunt who don't have the slightest clue how to raise children. And so they're thinking, what do we do? Who do we reach out to? And in the end, it's their co-op or their Commonwealth school that they turn to that really help them solve the mystery and get the parents and the brother back. We've had lots of homeschooling parents and students thank us for the book, and I just wanted to read to you a little message that I got on Facebook a few months ago. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Milne, thank you so much for the Lost DaVincis. I thought that there were not very many people in the world like me and my happy family. This is from a 10-year-old girl. Now I know that the Da Vinci family is just like mine, and I love them. My favorite part of the book is when Aunt Brenda is criticizing the children for their quirky behavior and blames it on their homeschooling. Sophie tells her aunt that there are plenty of quirky people in this world. Not everyone fits in everywhere. But I want to talk about that need to fit in. It is human nature to want to fit in somewhere. As a foster mother, I have witnessed firsthand the effect of the agonizing loneliness in a child who just doesn't fit in. We bring into our home children who have been abused, neglected, sold for drugs, addicted to every kind of substance, and left to fend for themselves. Many of them had found belonging in gangs, ethnic groups, druggy friends, and criminals, all to fulfill their need to fit in. Now Maslow, he places the love and belonging in his hierarchy of needs after the safety and basic needs. He might have changed his analysis or his scale if he had a chance to study my foster children. Because I see kids who sacrifice safety and basic needs every day to keep their membership in violent, abusive gangs, ethnic communities that perpetuate poverty mentalities and broken drug-addicted, psychologically sick families, all for their need to fit in somewhere. Now, I'm not implying that this is sane behavior. I'm just saying that it is a very important human need. But with the decline in our religiosity, the rise in divorce rates and children being born to single mothers, and the great metropolitan explosion in the past 40 to 50 years, people began to look for alternatives to fix their social needs. And political leaders, together with intellectual elite, created an alternative to churches and families with the passing of the compulsory education laws. And one of the greatest influences felt in this movement was made by John Dewey. Not only through his prolific publications, but also through his financial backing that he received through the Carnegie Foundation. He called public schools the perfect democratic social communities where children teach children and well-trained teachers become the moral guides. He said, the development within the young of the attitudes and dispositions necessary to the continuance and progressive life of society cannot take place with direct conveyance of beliefs, emotions, and knowledge. He said it takes place through the intermediary of the social environment. Dewey's progressive philosophies gave rise to the modern interpretation of the purpose of schools. Ask anyone who has ever homeschooled or taken their children out of school, the question they get asked most is, what about their social life? Not, what about their education? Because our public schools are now the place where we socially engineer. This comes out of his Pedagogical Creed. He says, I believe, finally, that the teacher is engaged not simply in the training of individuals, but in the formation of the proper social life. I believe, this is his Pedagogical Creed, so it's about 3 pages long. It's really easy to find on the internet. You can verify this by just Googling John Dewey's Pedagogical Creed. It's the last 3 paragraphs in that. I believe that every teacher should realize the dignity of his calling, that he is a social servant set apart for the maintenance of proper social order and the securing of the right social growth. I believe that in this way, the teacher always is the prophet of the one true God and the usherer in of the true kingdom of God. And if you would like to know what he's talking about, Dewey was one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto. If you don't know what the Humanist Manifesto is, you should Google search it and read all 3 of them, the one from the 1930s, the 1970s, and the current one. It's just getting more and more socialist, atheist, and it feels that's where our nation is going, because John Dewey is the father of our current education system, and this is the agenda of that. Okay, so in summary, it's a human need to fit in, and in the past, our churches and our families filled those needs, which I think is still a really, really good place and an important place to turn to, and we should be. But because of compulsory education laws, our culture has so drastically changed, and the children engaging in alternative education find it harder and harder to fit in with a group of people, of peers in their churches, because those peers tend to be very friend-centered because they've been socialized correctly, and those who are doing alternative education, any kind of alternative education that takes them out of that kind of environment, tend to have to really turn toward their families to find their identity and fit in. So those who are doing alternative have more of a family-centered culture. And I tell you, when I first started homeschooling, people always said to me, what about their social life? And I said, well, I think they're going to be fine. But in the end, I will tell you, as my older children became teenagers, I realized at church, they still didn't fit in well because they weren't sharing the same culture. And it was a great frustration to all of us because I highly prize my church. I think it's a really important part of my children's education. So I was trying to figure out, what should I do? How do I give to my children who are beginning to leave the nest and needing to have a little bit more social interaction? How do I find a place for them to fit in? And that's where the new Commonwealth School was born. This is why I really join my voice with Steve Adams and say that we need to create covenant communities of voluntary association that focus on education. Okay, let me just explain to you really quickly. There are three types of, I think, community schools, if you will. There's the mom school, and the mom school is an organization directed by one mom or dad. They may teach all the offerings or may orchestrate the teachings of the classes or subjects by other people in their little organization. And it lasts as long as that mom is willing to continue being in charge or doing what she's doing. The other is a co-op. The co-op is a group of families that want to share in taking part in a special venture, such as the NOAA plan or maybe the 4-year rotation. And they have usually a small group of families. And they each take part in teaching that specific kind of curriculum. And it also lasts as long as the families need it to last. And then the third one is the Commonwealth schools, or I call it the new Commonwealth School. And there are reasons for that new in front of it. Our schools actually started with a title called Common Schools. And I didn't want anyone to get confused with common schools because that's not really what I'm a proponent of. And so I put the new in front of it, and Commonwealth is actually for the common good of all people. That's where the word Commonwealth comes from. So I'd like to lay down a foundation for you that there are 7 principles, or what I call 7 elements that a new Commonwealth school needs to have. And first of all, they need to have what I call the torchbearer. Someone who is willing to carry the torch. And a lot of times a new Commonwealth school will start as a co-op or as a mom school, and the person who's leading that, or the group who's leading that, become the torchbearer. The torchbearer has to have these 5 things. 1, they have to feel a call. If they don't feel a call, it's not going to work. No one can do anything worthwhile if they don't feel a call passionately move them along. I think you will all agree with me on that. And then they need to have a vision. And anyone who does anything worthwhile must begin with a vision. And I want to tell you a little bit about my story. I actually, my background is theater. I was a musical theater major up at the University of Utah, and became highly involved in the community theater at Salt Lake Community College. I was the costume shop manager. And my children were kind of growing up in that environment, and my daughter was really excited, wanted to become an actress. And so I just decided that was not the culture that my family that I wanted them to participate in. So I decided to create some kind of community in my area that would be able to fill that need for my daughter. And I was looking for something that we could perform as a play without having to pay royalties on, and I thought, well, Shakespeare, we could do Shakespeare. And although I was a musical theater major, I had never studied any Shakespeare. It was pretty exciting to me when I started to study Shakespeare. I did cry all summer trying to figure it out. I don't like to read. I never have considered myself a reader. I will tell you, the books that I have read in the last 15 years would fill probably 20 pages. I still don't like to read, but I think it's a necessity, and in order for me to be able to be a freedom lover, I have to read, and so I do it. But that Shakespeare thing was, I mean, if that's where I was going to start, I don't think I did a good job choosing, because it's really, really hard. In the end, what I discovered is Shakespeare's so magical. It's so amazing. It's so beautiful. He was not only a poet, but he was a philosopher. And he was and our language is made so amazing because of Shakespeare. He added 20,000 words to the English language. At the time, I didn't know what a great thing I was doing, so I didn't have much vision. But as we were going along, we had a couple of seasons of Shakespeare, and my friends started to talk to me about how we sort of needed to have some kind of a formal organization. And they kind of put me in charge of making sure that that happened. And I had joined forces with another teacher who was teaching constitutional studies, and my second daughter was quite involved in all of that. And so we kind of joined together, and that's how our organization began. And I had to learn so much about how to do a formal covenant organization. And so I set about to get an education. I just want to read you a list of books that really have influenced what I've done. First of all, a Thomas Jefferson education is probably the highest on my list, as Jesse did this great presentation. He could have sung all my song over here, because that is what our school is all about. The second is Teach the Children by Neil Flinders, The Underground History of American Education. I spent time mentoring with John Gatto. He's so eccentric. And he doesn't like Mormons, and that I'm a Mormon, so he thinks we're sheeple. But anyway, we had lots of conversations about that. Anyway, The Fourth Turning by Strauss and Howe, I think, is a must-read. From Plato to Piaget, I think is an absolute must-read. How Children Learn, How Children Fail, Understanding the Times. If after reading and Understanding the Times you don't do something different than what's happening today in public schools, I would think that you have your ears closed, your eyes closed, and your mouth shut, because it will change you. The 5,000-Year Leap by Skousen and countless other classical literatures. I've had lots of training, and that fourth one is training. I've attended so many seminars. My husband keeps telling me that I'm a seminar junkie. I can't get enough. I always have to have more. I chose a personal mentor who's been mentoring for me for about the last 15 years. She's a personal friend of mine. And, well, she wasn't at the time. She was a stranger when I first met her. But we've become very close and have done many projects together. And in the end, I did end up getting a degree, a master's degree in education, but I was very picky about the kind of education I wanted. I wanted a liberal arts education, and that's what I got. Okay, in the last one, pass the torch. If you don't have the ability or the character to be able to pass a torch or give your organization to another leadership, then you should think twice about starting a new Commonwealth school, because it will die if you don't have that characteristic inside of you. George Washington was our greatest example of the willingness to pass the torch. He was offered kingship in our country after he was made president, and he refused, knowing that that was really against all the principles that we had been taught or that they had been about. And in fact, he thought there was a flaw in the Constitution. The flaw he saw was that there weren't term limits on how many times a president could run for president. And so he decided, because he knew that not only did we live by codified law in the United States, but we had the tradition of precedented law. And he decided to set the precedent that presidents will only run for 2 terms, and then they would pass the torch. And that precedent was honored up until FDR, who decided that precedent wasn't needed, or there were extenuating circumstances, or whatever he thought, whatever excuse he gave. And he ran for 4 terms. He died in his 4th term, and right after that, the Congress created an amendment to the Constitution, making it so that they could only run for 2 terms. But the most important part is that we understand that this work isn't about me. You know, I have a covenant community school where I work my tail end off, and we do amazing, wonderful things there. But it isn't about me, and it isn't about my school. Abraham Lincoln says, one can do anything as long as they don't care who gets the credit. Okay, the second one is stewardship education. That's what I call it in my book. I was inspired by Neil Flinders, who calls it agency education. I think they're the same kinds of things. The reason why I call it stewardship education is because I believe stewardship means that the student is in charge of their own education. And as Jesse said, Louis L'Amour says, all education is self-education. I've totally bought into that. Okay, so stewardship education or agency education is based on this formula. It's an economic formula. The freedom that we should have the freedom to try and the freedom to fail, because that equals the freedom to succeed. Failure is one of the hardest things for us to be able to tolerate. None of us want to be failures. None of us want to fail, and we don't want to see our children fail. Recently, I did a simulation with a bunch of students in our school, and I had parents helping, and it was a simulation where children could fail. And I had this one mother helping, and she just could not stand the fact that her daughter was failing over and over and over again in this simulation. And it was bringing her so much pain. So if we truly want to have agency education, we have to be okay with feeling the pain that failure brings. But just because we fail once doesn't mean we have to fail twice. My brother, who is the founder of Kinko's, partnered up with a man who had tried and failed in 5 different businesses before my brother met him. And the story is in a book called Copy This by Paul Orfalea. And Paul, he has really curly hair, so Kinko's is named after his nickname, Kinko's. And he came to my brother and he says, I have this really good idea, but I failed at the last 5 businesses I've done. Do you want to be my partner? And my brother's like, sure. I'm sure I could learn from all your failure. He was a young buck, you know, and my brother retired when he was 48 years old as a millionaire because he piggybacked on the failures of somebody else and was willing to believe in them. That's what success really is. Okay, our school has to have a philosophy that supports stewardship education or agency education. At our school, we do a Thomas Jefferson education. That's our philosophy. And we do what we call, our curriculum is based on sort of the Hebrew model, the house of the book and the house of study. And we do have a training company that we work straight with so that our parents and our teachers are trained well in our philosophy and our curriculum. Let me tell you a little bit more about our philosophy. In the formal world of education, our philosophy is called religious perennialism because it's based on that Hebrew model, which is the freedom, so the goal is truth. They're freedom motivated. Their culture is family-centered. They use classics. They're guided by mentors. It is about their moral training is public and private virtue. And there is a strong belief in absolutes. Okay, and our curriculum, as I said, we have a training company called Lemmy. This doesn't mean that you all have to choose the same kind of thing that we do in our Commonwealth school, because I think if you just have a philosophy that supports the stewardship education or agency education and a curriculum to match it, then you'll be fine. But I really believe that well-trained mentors and well-trained parents are the key to your success. Because it takes so much courage to do agency education. It's so easy to fall back into the old habits of compulsion and force. Neil Flinders, in his book, Teach the Children, says, those who embrace agency education will need courage, patience, and vision. The learner is given greater opportunity to exercise the powers of responsible choice. Encouragement is given to seek and direct the preparation that will enable each individual to better fulfill his or her personal mission. Stewardship or agency education requires lofty expectations, clear standards, an expanded concept of scholarship, a revision of thinking regarding grades, assessment, and evaluation, and a greater role for effective parenting. Practicing a better form of education is not easy. It calls for commitment that is rooted in faith. It's so much easier not to have faith when somebody else is in charge. Okay, number 3, the formal organization. We use this very easy, simple formula. It's no mom ek pa. No mom ek pa, as you can see it down the side. We have to name our organization. Ours is called Liber Academy. The objective, we have a mission statement for ours. As I said, I'm just using my experience as an example. Yours may not, isn't going to look exactly like mine. We have our own vision. We're very locally driven. We have members. We have parent members and we have student members, and we have them defined in exactly what they look like. We have teacher members. We have officers. We have a chairman, a co-chairman. We have a finance, treasurer, thank you. We have a principal mentor. I am the principal mentor there, and my job is to maintain the training of the parents and the mentors, which is actually was the original intent of a principal. They weren't supposed to be in charge of running a school. They were supposed to be in charge of making sure that the curriculum and the mentoring or the teaching was up to par. Then we define our meetings, how many times we have to meet a year, the executive authority who in the end makes the decision, and then our committees, and then our parliamentary authority and our amendment process and ratification. We do have a constitution, not bylaws. Constitutions are a little bit harder to change than bylaws because we really care about the philosophy of education that we maintain. And this is what maintains the quality of your education. Okay, you can be very cost effective if you keep in mind what we call the cost effective clover. The members, the volunteers, the workers, and the outsourced work. Members for us are the parent members and the student members. The volunteers are also the members, and so we have to keep that in mind as we are serving customers that are our members and as we are using them as volunteers too. And our workers are our executive board, our administrative board, our teachers, and our mentors, who can or cannot be, or what, depending on your bylaws, be paid. But because it has so much volunteerism, it still is very effective. And then we have outsourced things to other companies. We have our training company that is outsourced. Like, as I said, we use LEMI, which is short for Leadership Education Mentoring Institute. And then we outsource some of our website stuff and things like that we don't want to have to take care of in-house. This makes it super cost-effective for us. We actually are our 2-day-a-week school. We have our core curriculum on one day and extracurricular on the second day. I have 2 children in the school, and it cost me about $450 for the semester to have my 2 boys in the school. I think that's really super reasonable, in addition to some of the curriculum that they have to purchase. We only use classics, so we would go to just Amazon or something to buy those books. Okay. All right, parent governance is the fifth one. Parent governance is the key to the success of the new Commonwealth school, and the key to restoring to our democratic ideals, because parent governance indicates that people can govern themselves, and that they can be good, upstanding people. Now, when I talk about democratic ideal, let me tell you what I mean by that. According to the 5,000-year leap, this is the democratic ideal: the rule of law, a respect for inalienable rights, a moral and virtuous people, and the balance and check of powers. That's the democratic ideal. And as I said, we need to have parents who are willing to be independent, teachable, they know how to lead and to follow, emotionally regulated, committed to working systems, able to balance between family ferocity and community dedication. The word family ferocity is something I think we need to continue in our circles, because we are not ferocious about keeping our families together. We're not ferocious enough. And I think that's what the homeschooling movement is trying to do. I think it's just swinging the pendulum really hard to one side into that family ferocity. Okay. We use the Moses principle. I can go into detail. I'm a little bit out of time. I'm not going to go into detail about that. That just means that keep your numbers small. 10 is, in the Hebrew, is a tithe, and then a vil is 30 to 50, and then a ward is 100. So we keep ours at the level of a vil. And then the last one is be supportive of the family culture. We try to have family activities with our school. We are a family school from 0 to 16. We offer parent training. We're respectful of the family time and activities, and we focus specifically on core curriculum because that's where we know that our parents need us the most. This is a picture of my wonderful school. They created T-shirts that says on the front, want freedom, and on the back it says, get virtue. And they're visiting in the Capitol in Washington, D.C. The young man on the very end is one of our students who's serving as an intern at Washington, D.C., and they had this grand idea that they were going to go visit him. So the possibilities are unlimited and pretty exciting of what we can do, especially when you put students in charge who aren't afraid to think big. I just want to leave you with a few words. The rewards for me are really, really big. I'm going to share with you a text that I just recently received. Aneladee, our daughter just got accepted to 2 universities. Homeschooling rocks. And I said, sweet, which one will she accept? And then she said, she doesn't know yet. She has to apply to a scholarship to BYU-I and BYU Provo. Whichever gives her the best, she'll make that choice. Thank you for all your mentoring with her. She is a different girl today because of your help. I'm a different woman as well. I am eternally grateful to you. She wouldn't be getting these acceptance letters if it hadn't been for you. You turned her around. Thank you for both of her parents from the bottom of our hearts. Let us join hands and fight for our families and communities with ferocity. Let us fight. Let us be free to build the families and communities that we want to have. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.